Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our breakfast briefing. So, the second of the year. Um, so, for the first briefing, we discussed a topic about risk, and we thought after that briefing it would be very interesting to discuss about valuation and to have an introduction to valuation for CGOs. And I'm very glad that Fabian Decane, Head of Valuation Services Luxembourg, has accepted to make a presentation this morning. Fabian has more than 25 years of experience in valuation, so he's really an expert in this field. So he will lead us through a presentation that should approximately be 1 hour. So the main agenda for today, we have like 5 points, will be to discuss the evolution of the valuation regulatory framework, also the AFM directive and its impact on valuation, the valuation process and asset types, and also to discuss about the different stakeholders involved in the valuation process. And last but not least, to have the CSF, latest highlight on valuation. So normally we do first a presentation and we take 15 to 30 minutes to have questions at the end. However, if at the end of each part you have some questions, you can put them on the chat and I will relay them. Just to mention that presentation will be shared with you at the end or in the coming days after the presentation. And I wish you a very good session. And Fabian, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you. Do you hear me all? Yes? Is it okay?
Yes,
Yes,
we hear you.
yes, we do.
Perfect. Thank you. So good morning, everyone. Nice to meet you. So thank you, Richard, for the introduction. And as mentioned, for this this breakfast, we will go through a bit the main concept of valuation for CGOs. So that won't be a technical aspect, but mainly the spirit of valuation within the fund industry framework and how this is governed by the different regulation, who is doing what kind of attention point needs to be addressed. Richard has already presented the agenda. Allow me to get through it once again. So you see all these points. We believe that it was a bit essential before going to the what is needed for the different stakeholders to get a bit this, once again, the spirit of the valuation regulatory framework. So for this, we will quickly start with a bit of history and see for what the regulator did for the last 2 decades and how the valuation regulatory framework evolved since, I would say, 2007 or something like that, so slightly 20 years. It's always a bit the same spirit, but it's important to keep that in mind to get a bit what are the duties of each and every one involved in the process. Then we will have a deeper look to the famous AFM directive, because that was a bit the first official regulation and from what big piece of the asset under management to address directly and officially some very strict rules on valuation. And these strict rules have led to specific responsibilities within the organization. Once we have a bit that regulatory foundation, we will go through the valuation process. Or I should have rephrased that, valuation operating models. You will see that under the AFM directive, there are various ways of setting up a valuation process, and these various ways will a bit transfer the task and duties depending on which setup is chosen. And then we will see as well, depending on the asset types, and we will discuss as well why there are so many asset types, there are different controls that need to be carried out at the AFM level to ensure sustainable valuation. Then when we have that, it's time to go to the review of the different stakeholders involved in the valuation process, but as well to exactly know what are their duties. And as mentioned by Richard, last but not least, the CSSF latest highlight on our valuation. And then we will wrap up with the main key takeaways of the valuation within the fund industry and what are the main pillars that needs to be paid attention to. As mentioned by Richard, please feel free to jump, to raise a hand, to drop a question if you want to discuss something or if something is totally unclear. So that's me. So Fabio De Keynes, Richard already presented me. So evaluation of the evaluation regulatory framework. So from a financial history point of view, I guess that most of us remember what happened a bit before 2010 and that now famous 2008 crisis. That was first a credit crisis because of wrong valuation of CDOs, then liquidity crisis. So we have seen and observed a surge of regulation governing not only the banking industry, but for us more specifically the fund industry. In 2010, I mean, there were not alternative investment. The world was made of UCIs. And one of the first trace of how the valuation was addressed in the regulation was the law of the 17th of December 2010, and that was made for UCIs. So, and you see there on the left-hand side, the second bullet point, for securities for which the latest quotation is not representative, the valuation shall be based on the probable realization value, estimated with care and in good faith. And that definition is very, very interesting because that notion of representativeness is key for each and every one involved in the valuation process, because you need to ensure that that's one of the main spirit behind the regulation, that the price that is feeding a fund for whatever asset is representative. What is representativeness? An example, you have a company that is issuing a corporate bond, and in order for the price to be representative, it means that it needs to be quoted, traded, and with market deepness. And if the price is contributed only by the issuer itself, the price is not considered representative. So, and how to estimate, otherwise, the probable realization value, that's a very nice way to describe what is a fair value. And fair value, you will find it all around for every kind of assets. Then in 2011, so Richard mentioned that the first breakfast was talking about risk. I don't know if you have discussed the CSSF 11512 in the previous big breakfast that was dedicated for UCIs. It was mainly discussing the validation of the value at risk model, but as well for OTC derivatives. The management company shall ensure appropriate, transparent, and fair valuation of OTC derivatives. One point, why only addressing transparent and fair valuation of OTC derivatives for in that regulation? Because a UCI doesn't have only OTC derivative, because it was deemed the implication of that sentence means that by the time it was maybe commonly believed that every line, every holding of UCI was made of liquid asset and didn't deserve specific attention point, only, for instance, the central administration to denote the price and to feed it within the portfolio. Then 2012, came the famous AFM directive, as mentioned, dedicated for AIFs, and one big article, Article 19, AFMs shall ensure that a proper and independent valuation of the asset of the AIF can be performed. That one has implied a lot of setup and different organization, because it implied the creation of role of conducting evaluation officer, of valuation team, of specific reporting made to the board, and so on, just to ensure that proper and independent valuation. In 2018, the CSSF issued a circular that was focusing on governance, and one of the chapters that deserve attention is the chapter 6.6 that was clearly the reorganization of the valuation function. The spirit behind it was a bit about governance, oversight, transparency, and it was strengthening the official European regulation framework. Then last but not least, in 2022, the CSSF, so I'm linking as well with the first breakfast. I don't know if you have addressed that. The issue with valuation is that under specific market condition, you might have difficulties to get input to price your assets. So what was requested is to create a bridge, a connection between the risk framework and the valuation ones, because the risk framework is supposed to set up stress testing under specific market condition, and the outcome of this stress test should be the same that the valuation made under extreme market condition. And then last but not least, and that's already is providing the path for what is needed, the valuation models needs to be documented by each and every one, well, at least by the dedicated persons in the valuation process. And we will go to that later to do what. Is there any question so far or comment on the regulatory framework? Okay. So I mentioned here, so 2012, with the rise of the alternative investment world, that the IFM directive was issued first initially, as usually at the EU level. Level 1 was adopted in June, which is the directive to 2011-61 EU. And roughly 1.5 years later, that was the delegated regulation level 2 that was adopted under the name 231/2013. Why it is AFM directive? I mentioned that we had the 2008-2009 crisis, and the goal of most of the regulators in the world was to ensure that the financial market were safer, more reliable, more transparent, and constantly regulated. It's not across UK. Sorry, there is a typo over there. It's across EU, even if UK was part of the EU by the time. And no, there is a kind of duplication of the IFN directive under the UK. And the spirit of the AFM directive is built on three main goals: financial stability, because you have specific rules to be encountered, a bit like the eligibility directive for UCITS, investor protection, and market harmonization. And if you have a look, if you take time to have a look to this directive, you see that the main high-level principles are about risk and liquidity management, transparency and reporting, investors reporting. There is as well some attention on remuneration, on conflict of interest policy. So each and everything is put in place to have something that is providing more stability. But last but not least, and it's bolded, that's the first directive in the fund industry that is addressing clearly some valuation rules. We will see that these valuation rules themselves are really made of common sense, because they are, if I go back there, always linked to a notion of price representativeness. And so typically, how this is translated in IFMD is that the price needs to be independent of the asset of the AIF. Okay? Here, just to highlight on which high-level principle, the valuation is covered under Article 19 of Level 1 and under Article 67 to 74 under Level 2. The pillar are, and there is the pillar are the following ones. So you have, first of all, the general principle. So it means that the IFM needs to set up consistent, sound, and documented valuation procedures. What has to be kept in mind The valuation procedures, they are this kind of documentation needs to evolve. It's a living document. They are living. It's not written once for all and then stop, because it might be that from one NAV to another date of NAV production, that there will be procedures evolving because of plenty of exogenous factors, new variable, new market situation, market turmoils that were not addressed at the beginning that require additional procedures, or just new assets that were not foreseen to be onboarded, new providers, new stakeholder. So that has always to be in line with and reflect the reality of the day-to-day life. Frequency, so it was addressing as well the frequency of valuation. So on the alternative investment side, it's at least annually, but for some open-ended fund, that might increase to quarterly, and I have already observed from some open fund monthly NAV for AIF. Article 69 that describes the rules on how the NAV is calculated. Article 70, valuation policies and procedures. So it must be written, robust, and applied consistently. So it's not only about documenting the operational process, but all the models, all the hypotheses, all the input, all the protocol of transfer, all the exchange of information between stakeholders, between third-party providers, needs to be clearly detailed and made available and kept up to date, which might look to be a fastidious job, and indeed it is. But I mean, that needs to reflect exactly, specifically on the model point of view, what is done when it comes, for instance, to what we will see later, a Mark II model rather than just downloading a price. Article 71, models and methodologies. So appropriate models for illiquid and complex assets with validation before using them. It's not always done, but I mean a validation, a model validation needs to be done. So when do we use models and methodologies? So let me get back here. I was talking about price representativeness. If it happens that you have a very illiquid product, for instance, a private equity or a bond that is not quoted anymore, then you need to apply a specific model. And if you apply a model for an illiquid asset, that model needs to be described, and before being used, validated, which means backtested, tested, and to ensure a fair representation of the behavior of the underlying asset. Article 72, the AFM, and we will see that later on the operating model, allows the use of external valuers. We will get back to that later, but what is an external valuers under the regulation? This is something that is, even if the responsibility remain unlimited, the ultimate responsible remain the IFM itself, the use of an external valuer is someone that can bear unlimited liabilities to the IAF because of gross negligence. There are some people, some actors that are choosing, rather than doing valuation internally, to appoint external valuers. In that case, there are heavy due diligence and oversight requirements, but we will see a bit later on what is the difference between the operating model. Article 73, and it's made of common sense, independence of valuation. There should be a clear separation for portfolio management. There should be a conflict management policy to avoid that people that are carrying out the valuation, for instance, do not have any interest in the lines they are valuing themselves. And then it's a bit a reflection of the Article 19. The valuation needs to be independent. If you ask the portfolio managers, which we observe, which is observed, for instance, on the PE side, that needs definitely, you need to put safeguards to ensure that you are not relying by and closing your eyes on the valuation provided by the portfolio manager. And then Article 74, I mentioned that the documentation and all the governing aspect were not static, and you need to carry out regular review of valuation policies and controls to ensure that they still reflect the reality of the valuation operation. Any questions so far? No. So here I was mentioning the target operating models. So when we have a look at the directive itself, we see that it allows two kind of operating models. So either the IFM is leveraging of the IFM, its internal IFM valuation function, and it might go, so it's on the left-hand side of the screen. It might go that it's fully in-house, that you have a full valuation team that has developed its own models, and then can carry out the valuation for every kind of asset. Or you can appoint a third party to carry out the valuation for you, for instance, for assets for which you don't have the internal competencies. But in that case, first of all, the IFM is still the ultimate responsible, but I mean the third party is just an outsourcing of the valuation. There are no liability from the third party to the IFM valuation function. But what the IFM directive allows as well is that an IFM can use an external valuer under the definition of the IFM law. So what does that mean? While the IFM remains ultimately responsible and liable with regard to losses relating to valuation, the external valuer in turn is liable to the IFM for any loss suffered as a result of negligence or intentional failure to perform its duties. What does that mean? So first of all, that of course the external valuer is liable, but I mean it implies that it decreases the role of oversight from the IFM when you appoint an external valuer. I mean, you need to do the due diligence. People still need to be ultimately responsible, but I mean, all the job is done by the external valuer, who is entirely liable. So you need to carry out less oversight, less challenge than you do if under that very specific setup. Okay, and so that's interesting to see that, because with the rise of the different assets and more illiquid and diversity in the asset side, I do observe it's not yet major, but I mean the increase of request for external valuer is really increasing. And that's just a personal observation. I remember that when the IFM directive was issued, we did not believe by the time that one single actor will decide to act. No, we did. I did not believe by the time that one single actor would decide to play the role of external valuer. But now it's evolving, and there are some people that are accepting that role.
So Fabian, sorry, maybe just one point. So if you go back to the previous slide, based on your experience, what we see the most in Luxembourg currently is to have a IFM valuation function in-house, or?
It's more on the left-hand side.
Yeah, okay.
It's more on the left-hand side. The reason behind is that so we do, for instance, my company, we accept the role of external valuer for specific reason, and we do see more and more people with the increasing complexity of asset that are asking for external valuation because, and I think because of a kind of internal cost-benefit analysis, that you need too much resources to start the oversight when you appoint a third party for very specific complex assets.
Okay, thank
But
you.
indeed, that's more on the left-hand side. That's the major thing setup that we do see. So, always keeping in mind our storylining. What are the impacts of valuation for CGO? But it's important as well to a bit see what are the main controls and what needs to be addressed And this is a valuation process is, I mean, it's the same for any kind of asset types. It's really the same. It's really agnostic. So what do you need to know? What need to be checked? First of all, you need to check the product's features. What kind of payoff? What kind of risk factors? I mean, if it is easy to understand the payoff of Microsoft, which is a quoted equity, that's a bit less easy or straightforward to get the payoff on the private debt financing renewable energy project. What are as well the risk factors? So what are the variables driving the price of the product? And very important, once you have the characteristic and understood what is the product doing, what are the inputs needed to value it? The market data. Are they public? Are they available? Are assumptions that are needed? Yeah, and so that needs that requires screening of all the information provider to know as well how to feed and how to get the necessary information. Then we mentioned a lot, not a lot, but what about price representativeness? So before starting and triggering a mark to model, if you do observe there is a price, I mean, is that price representative? And by representative, so I go back to that example of a corporate bond issued by the corporate. We do see the price is moving each and every day. Does that imply that the price is representative? No. It means that it's a good sign, but first of all, who is contributing to the price? Are there some trades? What is the liquidity depth? Is there an order book? And it's by combining several factors that you can trigger or accept the price as representative. If not representative, then potentially you need to go to the 4 point, okay, maybe use a valuation method. So what kind of mark to model? What model will you use to value a private equity, an illiquid private equity? What model will you use to value a complex structured product? Once again, which inputs? Which calibration method? Do you have enough data on the market to ensure calibration? So these are all the questions that needs to be raised, or at least to be oversight and mastered and described in your valuation procedures and process to ensure that you have a sound governing valuation framework. And as you see, that each block of this chain will need dedicated controls. All right? Sorry. I mentioned at the beginning, so we are talking about valuation, and of course, one of the key element of valuation is the fair value of the asset. If you remember, and allow me, I mentioned the law here, this one, the probable realization value estimated with care and in good faith. I mean, that's really the definition, an easy definition of fair value, but the official one now is the price that would be received to sell an asset in an orderly transaction between market participants at the measurement date. Unless quotation is representative on stock exchange, price should be estimated, and then I reiterate, on the probable realization value, and done with care and in good faith. So it means that if there is a market, that there is a symmetry of information between the market, the buyer and the seller, that there is no bias, and the price then of that transaction reflects the fair value of a product. So now I mentioned that there were a lot of assets. And these assets, and we do see that, that I mentioned in 2010, most of UCI, we had kind of liquid asset held within each portfolio. Then with the rise of the AIF, we have UCI like AIF, but we have AIF that investing in private debt and in some structured product, and then they have a mix of liquid and illiquid asset. So it means that the spectrum of assets that are held by your portfolio is entirely is full. And there are three, that's a bit the categorization of IFRS for those who are aware of that. There are three kind of assets that we can find. The first one is that we call the level one asset, easy to value, liquid investment. The prices are directly observable and provide the most reliable measure of fair value. But of course, what it implies is that to ensure that the prices are reliable, a full set of controls need to be implemented to ensure representativeness. And I already a bit mentioned that. Independence, market deepness, number of trades, and so on. Example of this kind of asset, I mean the quoted equity, quoted bonds on stock exchange, even some quoted derivatives can be considered as level one asset. And for that, it's only a matter of decision, deciding the pricing sources that are being taken by your central admin, for instance, and that is need to be part of the valuation procedures. And the fair value is the price from valuation. That's the mistake, sorry for that. That the price that is observed on the market, and it's called the mark to market. So that's really the easy one. Then level two, hard to value. So assets for which fair value is determined using a specific models using input implied from financial markets. So based on observer market data, interest rate curve, volatility surface, and so on. But full set of controls is needed, and specifically on the calibration space to ensure market integrity. Because if you're not applying correctly the rules, you can create what we call an arbitrage, and then you go to a wrong price. Example of this kind of asset that will know request a model, these are OTC derivatives. That might be a swap. That might be an option, first generation, second generation. That might be a structured product. A lot of sell-side banks are issuing structured product that are a combination of bonds and exotic derivatives and require, I mean, they're contributing to the price, but the price is not independent. So the price needs to be made independent. So exchange needs to be done and a model needs to be applied. But these prices, it's a mark to model, but the inputs needed to value these products and to ensure that the model run are observable on the market, which then leads them to fall in the category level two. Level three assets, which are considered the hardest to value, not specifically technically for everything, but mainly because they require qualitative judgment. The valuation, even if done via a model, are sometimes not observable and so need qualitative assessment. Some of the valuation input, of course, can derive from level one observable asset, but in any case, most of the time, assumption involving professional judgment is needed. And as I might trigger as well, use of complex model that are needed, typically valuing the mezzanine tranche of a renewable project. So the price comes from a valuation model with observable and non-observable inputs, and this is called a mark-to model. So what kind of assets do we have there? We are thinking the most common one, the most easiest ones are the private equity world. There are a lot of assumptions that needs to be done and qualitative judgment that needs to be done. Private debt world, it might be that if you have a private debt on corporate, non-quoted corporate, there will be qualitative judgment to assess the credit risk. CLOs or some bonds in exotic currencies that might fall in level three because the shape of the interest rate curve need as well qualitative judgment. So, and we do observe, and with the rise of complexity of market, we do observe more and more products falling in this level three asset. So as you do see, three different kind of assets which imply different kind of processes and controls to ensure a sustainable valuation framework. So this one I propose because it's more about IT system, and I don't think it really makes sense to do that. It's more really the implementation. So let me see if we already discussed So what is important is as well to have a sustainable valuation framework, not only made of Excel sheet, that is able to be agile in any kind of economic context, normal and stress condition, with ensuring automatic assessment of price representativeness, optimum calibration and evaluation method, and different control layers. And that's what is needed within a valuation framework. Okay, so now that we have seen where the regulation comes from, what is the spirit of the regulator? What it has been brought? What AFM is bringing to the market? What are the type of assets? So three type of assets with specific controls, within the valuation process. Just as a memory, the valuation process, I told it's always the same whatever kind of asset we have. These four stuff are needed to be done should you be in level 1, level 2, or level 3. So, what are the stakeholders in the AFM world within the valuation process? First of all, of course, the AFM. The role of the AFM, it's the overall responsible entity. So it owns the framework, ensure the compliancy, and retains responsibility. There might be some issues, so I will correct that, but I need to review a bit the articles. Sorry for that. So this is what we discussed with Richard at the beginning. But anyway, if we have a look at the level 1, all the responsibilities of the IFM are mainly described in the famous Article 19. And under the CSSF 18698, it put forward the necessity of governance and oversight. Oversight means that you need to be able, whatever the kind of operating model to choose, and to control. So it implies that reports need to be done, valuation policy, valuation procedures, detection of any kind of inconsistencies in the daily pricing or monthly pricing, to be able to ensure the correct compliance. Then there are plenty of functions within the AFM, but there are also the valuation function, which main role would be execution. Performs evaluation, applies the model, and documents them. One key thing is that the valuation function needs to be independent. And they need to be independent, but as well they need to ensure that the price they provide or they validate are independent. We have discussed that already. And they need to carry out the necessary information or to produce the necessary information for the board to be able to make up their own decision in case of issue within the valuation observed in the asset. Portfolio management, but the role is investment. They might provide input, but they cannot influence the valuation. And even if they provide input, I mean, this input needs to be challenged and validated by the valuation function to avoid any kind of conflict of interest. Risk management, but the role of the risk management is to control. And more, there are some bridges between the valuation function and the risk management. And we have seen a bit before that the risk management framework and the valuation framework should be able to communicate specifically via stress testing. That was stated in the CSA report of CSSF, but it comes as well from an ESMA recommendation issued in 2022, if I am correct. External valuer, we have seen what it is. It's a specific notion brought by AFM that does not exist in UCI, that provides independent valuation, performs as the evaluation, ensures objectivity, is liable to the IFM, but before appointing an external valuer, a due diligence needs to be done and an oversight needs to be carried out by the IFM itself. The depository, it's oversight and it checks the different procedures, and the NAV, it's more control duties. For the senior management, it's about governance, so it needs to approve the policies, oversees the framework, and so it needs strong governance. For that, appropriate documentation should be brought to the senior management to ensure that they have the necessary information to make up their decision. The board, they are accountable and a bit like they monitor the compliance and they approve as well the policy and they have a strategic oversight. Administrator, but then a bit obvious, they do the NAV calculation and they calculate the NAV based on a specific requirement written by the AIFM itself. Auditors, I mean, they validate the account and they issue an opinion. I used to work as I was in charge of valuation in a Big Four, and I was supporting auditors. And indeed, most of the issue we had was about, so not when we had discrepancy, we did realize that maybe the governance framework and the independency of the prices were not always met, and these were kind of comments that we were raising to the auditors that were themselves raising that to their client. And last but not least, corporate governance officers, governance and oversight. They oversee the valuation framework, they ensure independence, monitor delegation, and de-escalate the issue. So it's again about accountability and strong oversight. Now, we go to the CSSF highlight on valuation. For those who have read it, the CSSF annual report, was it 2024 or 2025? No, 2025 is not yet issued, 2024. The main deficiencies around valuation were 50% of the deficiencies concern the use of valuation models. 36 of them concern the review of data source, and 14% of the deficiencies concern the composition and organization of the valuation committee. Alain O'Shade from the CSSF, a bit more than 1 year ago, stated a bit these 4 main bullet points. The valuation is key in the context of the functional investment fund. One key thing, and I try to highlight that during the discussion, they informed the market that they expect the board of directors to formally approve the use of valuation models in the context of the valuation investment that represent a material part of the UCI portfolio, but it goes as well for AIF. So they were missing approvals of model. It doesn't mean that the board of directors needs to be specialized in valuation or CFA or specialized in quantitative finance, but they need to be provided documentation that allow them to validate that and that allow them to formally approve. Because if they cannot approve, how can do they have accountability and how can do they have oversight without being informed for what is done? It's a matter of common sense, of course, but it was not yet always done, and the board of directors were not always formally approving this thing. And the valuation policies did not set up, in fact, the process underlying the change that will be brought to the models. This is what I was telling, is that the policies are a living document. If there are changes, that they need to reflect how the valuation time team was produced. And then I would say the key takeaway, for me, the 3 main concepts that are driving a valuation framework, and let's recall as well the very first slide and the notion of independence, of representativeness that was brought in 2010 after in the law of the 17th of December. It's about transparency, responsibility, accountability, and last but not least, independence. And independence, I mean, it's a matter of common sense, but that require, and I try to put that forward, specific duties and specific framework to be, or processes to be put in place to ensure that you can stamp the quality of the price that I used within the NAV of the different funds. Yeah, and do you have a question?
Thank you, Fabian, for the very interesting presentation. First, was very useful to get all the background and the responsibilities and what is needed. And it was very interesting to see in one of your slides that there was specific mention to the role of corporate governance officer in this process. So it's I think that's a very interesting point. So I don't know in the audience if anyone, any CGO is involved in this valuation process, and if she has any practical guidance or has raised or seen any issue in this respect. I think we have one question in the chat. So
You have a look.
regarding the valuation model, you just said that the board needs to approve the use of it. Should the board also approve the valuation model itself? My question is related to SAQ, where it says board should be informed about it.
What do you mean by SAQ? Sorry for that. I'm not sure to understand
Sorry.
the.
It's SAQ is the self-assessment questionnaire that we need to submit to the CSSF. There's a
Okay.
section where we need to tick to confirm the board was informed about all these topics. And in this context, now we need to include in our board meetings this point at the agenda. But we are not sure if we should approve the valuation model that we attach, or if it's sufficient to approve the use of it, and also if it's then approval or acknowledgement.
I would say that if you approve the use of it, if you want to ensure that to maintain the accountability, if you are accountable for something and you approve the use of something, you need to know how it is done, not only the not the use. So I guess that the validation of the model itself needs to be approved by the board as well, not only the use, because let's assume that which I'm not questioning, but it might be a very wrong model for whatever reason, and if the board approves the use of a very wrong model, then it's not carrying out properly the oversight.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Maybe if I may, so just what I tried as well to put back the global spirit, but if you do see the main important thing is to ensure that all the necessary information is made available to the people responsible and accountable. And for that, there are a lot of roles within the valuation process that are there to help the senior management and the board to be provided the necessary information. And underneath that, what does that mean? What does that imply? Is that always ensure to go from to the common sense, independence, validation, and maintenance of the policies.
Fabian, just a question from me.
Yeah.
You mentioned the AFM is ultimately responsible for this. So typically, I guess you wouldn't be interacting much with the CGOs, right? Like it would be the AFM who would bring this to the board and then make the recommendations and explain, right?
And I missed one part of the sentence. So the IFM will, so it will be that will interact with the board, but
So they are ultimately responsible to make sure that, the valuation is done properly and the model makes sense for the asset.
yeah, so the interaction indeed will be done by the IFM itself, by the valuation conducting officer, potentially with the support of the risk management that can be there as an advisory role. But of course, the recommendation cannot be done by a third party to the board because the IFM is itself is the ultimate responsible. Even in the case of the use of an external valuer, the external valuer works under the responsibility of the AFM, and the models needs to be approved by the AFM. And
Yeah,
not,
so just to backtrack, it's approved by the AFM, who then brings it to the board and presents it, right?
sorry, I'm not sure I'm hearing the.
Maybe
Yeah, my
Fabian,
headset
it's
is not the best, but yeah,
no.
Richard, if you
Maybe
understand what I'm saying.
let me take that. So I think there is a distinction between the board and the IFM itself. So just to have the distinction on who's responsible for that. So the AFM
Correct.
and
Yeah.
not the board. Is that correct?
That's
Yeah,
correct.
So there is a distinction indeed, but I mean that's the board of the IFM needs to approve and validate the policies. But I mean the oversight, the controls, and the execution of the valuation needs to be carried out by the different function of the AIFM. Am I answering the question?
Okay. Richard, are you able to summarize that with the CGO hat on? Like,
Yeah,
so, yeah.
maybe Teresa, the thing is would be to understand maybe your setup. How is the setup you mentioned working in practice to be able to answer easily the question. So how is your current setup? Maybe will help, or the setup you are thinking of.
Yeah, so you have a fund with a board, right? And then you have the AFM as well there.
So you have a
So
GP, you have a fund with a general partner, so that's your board. Is that correct?
correct.
Plus you have an
External
external AFM. Okay. It's because it's not an internal AFM. Okay. I think I see the question. Do you see the difference, Fabian, now? It's
I
because
mean, should you have a GP? I mean, it doesn't change anything on the role on the IFM because I mean, I mean, even if in external IFM and that you have GP, the role and duties doesn't change for each and everyone. So I'm not sure that I'm getting.
yeah. So
I'm Guillaume. Just want to understand clearly. So the IFM is responsible. So the board of the AFM is responsible to approve, okay, the valuation policy and the valuation model as well, because the valuation model is going to be used to produce valuation. So the board approves the valuation policy and the valuation model prepared by the valuation function, correct?
Indeed, yeah, that's correct. And by the way, within the valuation policies, the description of the models needs to be done. Because, I mean, the valuation policies and procedures always refer to technical references that describes the input and the models used.
Yes, so my
So
question is the GP of the fund will also need to approve that, assuming it's an external AFM.
why? Not sure about that.
That's
Okay.
The
That's the question I'm
for me,
asking. That's the question I'm
because
asking.
for me, my understanding, if you have an external IFM on you and the GP is separate, the GP has the final word to sack or not the IFM if he's not happy with. The GP has the final word. The GP has full power to terminate the relationship with the IFM he's not happy with. No?
Yeah, but the GP is relying on the AFM to do their job, right? So this is the thing, like the GP might not necessarily be familiar with the whole valuation process.
But for me, the GP doesn't approve the valuation
Oh yeah, no, I understand that now. Yeah.
or doesn't approve the model. It's the
Yes,
job of the
that's
AFM. Then if he's not happy with, he can just terminate the relationship and find a new IFM or value or whatever.
Okay, but doesn't CSSF expect the fund board, and in this case it will be the GP who acts as a fund board, to understand and approve the valuation procedures as well?
If the GP act as the board, is the CSSF expecting the GP to
The fund board, basically, whether it's a GP acting as a fund board for the private funds or whether it's a fund board itself.
But I mean, what is in that case the management company?
The management company, that's the question, because a question is to who approves it? Is it only the management company's board, or does the board of the fund, and in this case it would be GP, needs to prove that they understand how the funds are valued and therefore approve the valuation procedure as well and policy?
This one I will need to dig. I cannot answer straight on that one, and I will dig with one of my colleagues that faced this kind of setup before.
okay. Yeah, it would be great if you could confirm back to this.
Yeah,
Because
sorry.
Teresa, I understand this was the question, and we've been battling
Yes.
the question as well
Yeah.
on our
Yes,
side.
yes,
How many
exactly.
people has to approve it?
Exactly. It makes sense that the GP approves it and or at least acknowledges it. But yeah, this is just my CGO hat. Yeah.
Are there any other question?
No, none for me.
So we have a new question on the chat.
Whatever
So
he can, yeah, exactly. It can send me whatever conclusions. It's fine, but I don't want to lose down the
Sorry, Lana, I was reading Anne-Marie question and I didn't hear your question. You can rephrase it if you wish, and then I will address Anne-Marie Louis question. Okay, well, so maybe to answer Anne-Marie,
Exactly.
on which basis, on an ongoing basis, it's only when there is a change, of course. If you if the models are changing, or if you do realize that the model is not adapted anymore, anytime there is an update in the process, in the model, in the input, that has the time that it needs to be updated. So yeah. Am I answering your question, Anne-Marie? Ok, parfait. Jean, Yann Hano, ceux qui voulaient s'impliquer, GP needs to co-approve within the GP better control the rest of the performance of the FM because indeed, that's something that I need to dig on my side. I cannot answer on this one right now, or I'm not sure enough to provide you a correct answer. Lana, you did have a question? Lana, in case if you want to reiterate your question.
any additional question? Oh yeah, I heard that the CSSF expects the GP board member to at least prove that they understand the model that is used.
Yeah, well, understand, yeah, that's interesting. I don't know whether the CSSF use the word understand, but at least they have the necessary, that all the decision-making bodies have been provided the necessary information to inform them. Because once again, we cannot expect people to have a deep understanding, which is normal of which everything, but at least a transparency. And that was one of the pillars I was mentioning. All these kind of stuff are based on transparency. I'm playing with words, but I think that the spirit of the CSS is more to ensure transparency and information channel to the decision-making bodies.
Anything else? So I guess no. So I think we can close the session a bit earlier than anticipated. And
Can you hear me?
oh yeah, yes, we hear you,
Yeah.
Anne-Marie. Yes.
I'm very sorry. I was trying for now 10 minutes to reactivate my micro. No. What I wanted to say is, well, that's only my understanding, but about this difference between the ones that have to approve it and the ones, meaning at AIFM level, and the ones at GP level, who have to prove that at least they understand. So by understanding, I agree with you, it means that you have reviewed it and kind of at the same time, validated it, because if you don't get it, how are you supposed to, to say that you've understood it? So I think the real responsibility lays with the board of the AIFM and at the level of the fund, so meaning the GP, let's say if it is a GP, then they have to prove that they are aware of the valuation model and that they have understood it. That's at least how I understand it. So if it can maybe help redirect the question that was initially submitted.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So if there is no more question, thank you very much, Fabian, for the presentation. Thanks to the audience, as always, for joining our events. And thank you for your question. And hopefully we see you at the next session. Wish you all a nice day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you for
Bye.
Have a nice
Bye-bye.
day.